first, I would like to start off to Kyle. If you would please tell us just a little bit about yourself.
Okay, so thank you for the introduction, Laurie. So my name's Kyle. I am 25, and I'm the youngin in my family. I have one older brother, Colin, who is just a hair under 3 years old. He likes to say 2, 3, and he's really 2.5. And he's on the autism spectrum. And as Laurie mentioned, he struggles with a number of other mental health issues. I mean, to name a few, he has significant learning disabilities, severe ADHD. He suffers with excoriation or skin picking. And to top it all off, he has crippling anxiety and severe depression. And he deals with a lot, and he can kind of continues to deal with a lot in his life. And one interesting thing about my brother, though, is that he was diagnosed with autism quite late. He was 18 when he ultimately received the diagnosis. And back in the early 2000s, autism and sort of awareness of autism wasn't quite as sort of socially known in terms of like education or healthcare spaces. And so a lot of like, Colin was just Colin for me growing up. I mean, he was a little odd, yeah, but he was my brother. Well, for him, it was a bit of a struggle though, because we really didn't have any sort of labels or diagnoses that could kind of help inform what we do or understanding of him. And so he struggled a lot with school and a lot with making friends. And the thing about him though is he's unequivocally one of the absolute sweetest people you'll ever meet. He's a giant teddy bear. For me particularly though, my life is a little crazy in the sense that my father also has some challenges. In particular, those revolve around physical disabilities. He suffered a back injury when he was younger, which has led to some significant lifelong mobility issues. He's had to learn how to walk a couple times in his life. And so he's no Usain Bolt, as we tease him. But he's really been a major supporter. My mom is too. She's the linchpin of our family. She kind of helps and supports my brother, my father, and all of us as we're trying to, as Colin and I were growing up and we were navigating, healthcare and education. Due to growing up though with a neurodivergent brother and a father who has significant mobility issues, I really grew up with a significant awareness to the fact that people come in all different shapes and sizes, and there's a lot of challenges that people face that you might not necessarily know. And it ranged from things like going to the grocery store and there's no ramps for my father to go up, and so mobility was an issue, to things like having to console my brother because a teacher at school just didn't know how to interact with him or deal with him, and led to him being either demeaned or sort of dysregulated, and that can kind of cause issues. And so I grew up kind of quickly. I'm technically the younger brother, little brother, but I really transitioned into the little older brother role pretty quickly during my teens and onwards. And my brother's an adult dependent. My parents are legal guardians, and I am the alternate. And so growing up in this kind of context has really shaped a lot of who I am and what I aim to do today. Since he was diagnosed so late, a lot of sort of the work and research I do is really focused on trying to investigate and diagnose autism as early as possible, because that can open up a lot of doors to families and individuals to get resources or supports. Over to you, Nick.
All right, thank you. Hi. So my name is Nicholas. I'm a 24-year-old graduate student and research assistant under Dr. Lonnie Zwaigenbaum at the University of Alberta at the Glenrose Rehabilitation Hospital. And I'm looking broadly, I mean, the thesis is kind of still being talked about right now, but broadly at community transit, healthcare, professional education with regards to autism spectrum disorder. I myself identify as autistic. I was diagnosed when I was like 6 years old, between kindergarten and grade 1. The indicators for me were mostly, I was reading teachers' notes on top of on her desk and kind of questioning her teaching methods at 5 years old. I was doing a lot of parallel play and not really playing with other children. I was very anxious around other children when I was younger. I also have 2 younger siblings that are not diagnosed with autism. And one interesting thing that's kind of driven me to do autism work in general is my parents were told when I was 6 years old by pediatricians that I would not be able to comprehend things past a certain level. I think it was a 5th or 6th grade level. My parents always advocated for me, and I'd like to give them a huge shout out. I think my mom's on the call right now, actually. And I'd like to give her a huge shout out for advocating for me with school systems, with doctors, with behavioral therapists, and even family members to ensure that I always could work towards something that I wanted to do and is something meaningful for me. And yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Well, wonderful. Thank you both for being here and for introducing us to who you are. I have another question. I'll start with you first, Nick. What was it like navigating the transition from high school into adulthood for you?
So my transition from high school to university was quite unique in that in the last few months of high school, I was a pedestrian that got hit by a car. And it was hard to distinguish what was actually autism and what was the aftermath of that. But I did suffer a lot of like anxiety and depression in the transition period, and I still do to this day. The social bubble transition was also hard in undergraduate. Like I really had to kind of come out of my shell like socially, which was a little bit difficult to do. But I think it was I think I did a good job of it because I've been able to form like very meaningful friendships with people, which is something that like I had friends in high school, but like I didn't feel like a meaningful bond with them, whereas now I feel like I kind of did. So that was like a different that was a big transition point. And if I can talk about my experience in transitioning from undergraduate to graduate school, that was difficult, to say the least. I struggled with motor skills, social cues, and that unfortunately led to a bullying situation. So my background is in molecular biology. I kind of went to a biochemistry lab here at U of A. And unfortunately, there were some situations, like both my motor skills and with some bullying, that led me to have to leave that program. And I kind of had this period of reflection where I was like, what do I really want to do and what do I care about? And I'll kind of go more into that later, but I was very, very grateful for Dr. Zwaigenbaum for kind of taking me in. And yeah, the transition to this lab here at the Glenrose with the Autism Research Centre has been very smooth, but the transition to grad school in general was pretty rough.
Thanks for sharing that, Nick. And Kyle, I invite you to answer the same question.
Okay, so I'm going to just briefly talk about Colin's transition from out of high school, and then sort of my experience as sort of the sibling going through that. And Colin has a high school diploma, so he graduated high school, but he has not continued on to post-secondary. And if he ever wants to, believe me, I will be the first to champion that. But for the longest time, throughout K to 12, like he struggled. Towards the end of high school, we had a lot of accommodations that helped. I mean, he did grade 13, so he took an extra year, so things were a little bit more parsed out for him. And he had the accommodations of time and stuff like that. And a lot of our family really advocated for that. I mean, echoing a lot of the sentiments already discussed today. But we really had to fight for him to get through. And once he was out of high school, he lost a lot of that structure that his life was kind of built on, that rigorous, or not rigorous, that sort of solid framework of Monday to Friday is school, Saturday, Sunday is the weekend, kind of rinse and repeat. And with that evaporation, that framework, he struggled a lot, and he still does today. I mean, we're still trying to figure out ways to sort of help build that structure in for him. And we've tried different programs to varying degrees of success, and some have worked, and the ones that we have are godsend. But it's tough, and there's not been a lot of supports for people like Colin. There are supports in the school system, but I mean, I've kind of touched upon earlier, once you're past 18, a lot of those kind of dry up, and it can make it really hard because you sometimes feel you're left hanging. And for me, the transition out of high school and university was actually really kind of amazing. I got to explore a lot more of who I was, what I liked, new things like that. But that aspect of kind of self-discovery really went lockstep with my brother and my father needing increasing amounts of care and support. I mean, yeah, I feel kind of what you might say like a bit or a lot of pressure to sort of succeed, because whatever I do doesn't affect just me. I mean, it has the potential to affect my brother long term too. I mean, I can't, for instance, decide to move to Mexico and teach surfing on the beach. First and foremost, I would suck at surfing. I mean, the people who know me know I'm not the most coordinated person in the world. But it also affects Colin too, because I love my brother, I love my family, and I want to make sure they have the best quality of life that they can. And as such, with like school, there is this kind of self-imposed pressure to not just wanting to succeed, but to excel. And it really, it's not just my life that depends on how well I put things together. It's my brothers too. I mean, my parents are older, and I'm an alternate guardian for my brother, and so the consequences, or at least the self-imposed responsibilities that I feel, if I fail, it doesn't affect just me, but my brother. And I'm sure a lot of parents probably feel something similar with their kids, whether or not they're neurodivergent or otherwise. You want to make sure your kids have the best life possible. And for me, that's just, instead of a kid, it's my brother. And it really does change the way you think and act, and it really has for me.
Okay, thanks for sharing that, both of you. It sounds like a lot of responsibility on both of your shoulders there. As I mentioned in your bio, you're both associated with the Autism Research Centre, and I'm wondering, Kyle, first, if you could tell us a little bit about what brought you to the centre.
My experience is really, I mean, since Colin was diagnosed so late, at 18, we ended up learning a lot more about autism when he was 18. So I was 16, and my folks were like, "Oh, okay, we should know a lot more because we want to understand him and kind of help, best support him as we can." I mean, he's always calling, but it's just, there's some things that we got a little bit more insight into. It's like, okay, he's more sensitive to this, or we can kind of tailor things a little bit more towards him. And my parents really throughout my childhood have advocated and champions for my brother and his needs, but also just for other people too as well. I mean, for other families and children's. I mean, they've been parts of parent councils. They went to protests supporting education, talked to trustees, talked to parents and support groups. I mean, they've tried to contact our politicians to varying degrees of success. They've done the whole 9 yards. And so growing up, from my perspective, I was always, with my parents when they were doing it. They felt it was very important for me to tag along, and I was right there at those protests, just a tiny little Kyle, as they were pushing forwards and trying to help people, and not just us but others. And so while as I've grown older, I've been kind of increasingly, been more involved in that space as well. I mean, I've especially into my teenage years, and now I've volunteered. I've been more lockstep with my parents in terms of pushing for supports for my brother and other families in similar situations. And while my undergraduate degree is very much more in biomedical sciences and immunology, I was lucky enough to get a summer studentship at the Autism Research Centre here at the Glenrose, and doing research in the area of early screening and detection of autism in children. And needless to say, I've quite enjoyed my work, and I've somehow tricked the folks here at ARC into liking me enough, wanting to keep me sticking around. The cookies I baked probably didn't hurt, but my foray into the world of autism research really grew from that summer studentship. I mean, I did part-time research assistant work after that summer throughout the rest of my undergraduate degree. I learned and grew a lot over that period of time. So much so that I actually did my undergraduate thesis around autism research, and which I don't know how I tricked the biological sciences department to let me do that, but I'm not going to argue. Since then, though, I've kind of continued on to where I am today. I'm just finishing off a master's of science degree in pediatrics, and with any luck, I should be done in December. But since being at the Autism Research Centre, though, I've really focused on early screening and detection of children, and I feel particularly passionate about this in large part, due to my experiences with my brother and the fact that he was diagnosed so late. I mean, a diagnosis can be a scary thing for families, but it also can open up a lot of doors to supports and help for both the person in question and their families. I mean, we had none of that. Colin was diagnosed so late, so a lot of supports, some of them were contingent on him having a diagnosis or having, ticking certain boxes. And if you don't even know to, look for a diagnosis or look for more information, it's not even on your radar. And so while we were, sort of lucky enough to be able to afford some supports for Colin, because he had a severe stutter when he was younger, so we had speech language pathology and stuff like that. It was still hard. I mean, we could afford it, but we didn't do vacations, we didn't do sort of house renovations. We were trying to kind of keep it honest so we could sort of pay out of pocket for a lot of those supports. And not everyone is able to do what we did, though. Not everyone is so lucky, and so that's really part of the reason why I'm doing what I do today. I really want to help people and families like mine. And while we had to struggle through everything to try and get supports and help for Colin, I don't want other people to have to go through the same challenge, because it was tough. And yeah.
Okay, thank you, Kyle. And Nick, I'd ask you the same question about what brought you to the Autism Research Centre.
Thank you. For me, it was after that experience in the biochemistry lab, I went home. I was in Edmonton, and then I went home. I live in BC, or my family lives in BC. And there was this period of self-reflection. And I was really thinking, what do I care about in this world? What is an experience that I've had that I guess that I can that is a system that I think is could use more work, I can advocate for. And for me, the whole theme for me is paying it forward. It honestly comes down to what pediatricians told my parents about, not being able to comprehend past a certain level, and just having these odds kind of stacked against me, and how much my parents advocated for me and how much I've learned to advocate for myself. So I was very lucky to find the Autism Research Centre and, maybe be a voice in my career for people who maybe don't have the social support or the social support or the emotional support from family or from friends or whatever, just because it is such a like Kyle said, the word diagnosis is very scary. It doesn't have to be scary though. And I think for me, in my career, that's kind of like what I want to work towards, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you, Nick. My next question, I'll start with Nick, is you probably touched on this a bit before, but how have your long-term goals been shaped by these experiences?
Well, there was always this period, and I will kind of start with a bit of I always kind of masked and camouflaged. I'm not sure if that was talked on earlier because I wasn't here for the whole call because I had a class, but I've been doing a lot of like masking and camouflaging, I feel like, in the sense that a lot of people, a lot of my friends, like even though like I was able to form these deep friendships, were, like I'd still hide a part of me, or I'd still feel like I'd have to like be normal in a way and like not like the quirky person that I am, because I am a quirky person. But um I guess, sorry, I'm just trying to kind of think about my long-term goals here. So like because I was hiding autism, I never really thought to build a career off of my experiences. And then during that self-reflection period, I was like, wait a second, why wouldn't I? Like it was such an important part of my development, my growth, my becoming of a like an adult. And I think my long-term goals really shifted from that molecular biology side, which is a field I still have a lot of respect for, of course, to the more clinical, like developmental side of things, because I know, like I said, like the word diagnosis is scary for parents, for kids, for people who, or for like adolescents who get diagnosed later. Like it is a um, scary word and a scary situation, but it doesn't have to be. So I think my long-term goals really shifted from, trying to like be like this publisher in like a medical or like a biochemistry journal into like wanting to like advocate and be an advocate for people. And that's the big change. And like I really do think, like I am thinking about like whether I'm going to do like med school or a PhD or whatever after my master's. And for me, it's like what's important is that I can advocate for people and be a voice for people and give people hope. That's what's important to me. And my long-term goals have really shifted because of my experiences to be able to do that.
That's wonderful, Nick. Thank you for sharing that. And Kyle, I would ask you the same question. How have your long-term goals been shaped by your experiences?
Oh boy, howdy. How it hasn't, or what hasn't been sort of shaped by those experiences. I mean, growing up in my family has really sort of shaped who I am as a person, and kind of by proxy to do with my life. I mean, Dr. Hodges kind of mentioned this in terms of some of the families they saw, but I am much more sensitive to matters of physical and mental health than I would likely have been otherwise. I mean, if I go to a restaurant or a grocery store or a restaurant or a shop, and I notice it's accessible to people with wheelchairs, canes, and walkers and stuff like that, I notice that. Or if it's not there, I notice that as well. I also notice, if we're at a restaurant in the pre-pandemic days, how staff would treat my brother or people potentially sitting around us. Like, was it with kindness and dignity, or was it kind of just a bit more brusque or sort of more demeaning? I mean, and I really do notice when people kind of go out of their way to be kind and help others. I mean, that's what I strive to do. I mean, given my experiences, and what I really sort of want to do with my life, sort of as Nick mentioned, is kind of give back. I mean, I'd like to be a clinician scientist. I want to be in a position where I can kind of help families who, like mine, had a real lack of supports when they were really sorely needed. We didn't know a lot about what autism was when Colin was young, and neither did our family doctor. I mean, so we didn't have access to supports or any early interventions or things like that. I mean, even something like an informal, family support group, knowing of it or knowing about it would have helped, but we just didn't know. And so neither did we know, or family doctors or the clinicians we saw. And so when you don't know to ask, even what to ask, it's not even on your radar to ask, like you can kind of end up feeling a little bit lost. And so that's really what I want to be, is in a position where people who need that kind of anchor point or support to sort of help direct them to sort of the resources or supports or sort of things to help make it just a little bit easier.
Okay, thank you. So I want to thank you both for sharing your experiences, and I think you're showing both a lot of courage in sharing your personal stories here. And I'm wondering how often you share this type of stuff with your friends or your peers or coworkers.
See, that's funny because as a whole, I'm a very private person. I mean, for whatever reason, talking to 65 other people is so much different than talking to a friend or a buddy, or a conversation with a close friend. And for me, when I was younger in high school and even early in university, I really wanted to be defined by who I was as a person and not necessarily by my brother. And so much of my life has revolved around or will continue to revolve around Colin, either directly or indirectly, such that I really felt more so when I was younger, I'm a little bit more comfortable with it now, that I really wanted to be recognized for like my own qualities, my own achievements, or my lack of achievements, for that matter. In high school, like there was a few people that actually kind of knew what was going on. I mean, I had my friend group, and then within that friend group, there was maybe like two or three people who kind of had a sense of what was going on. And then transitioning into university, again, self-discovery and all that stuff, I got a little bit more comfortable with being open. And some of my best or closest friends know a large part of the picture, but not everything. Like even then, it took like a year or two, or a little bit more to kind of feel comfortable actually opening up. And my family is the way they are. My brother is who he is. As sort of mentioned earlier, like he has autism, but he is still Colin. Like autism is a part of him, but it's not the entire part of him. And so it's the same time though, it's tough. I mean, it can be incredibly isolating being a sibling or a caregiver to someone with exceptional needs. I mean, when a casual friend asks me how I'm doing, what do you say? If you're dealing with a lot, like if Colin's having major mental health struggles or issues, and you're balancing school or work, and your own potential lack of self-care, like do you just say you want to sit down? It's been a real doozy of a day, week, month, or year. Like I got a lot to talk about. You might as well get comfortable. Like that's tough. And well, I can't speak to for Nick. I mean, being a caregiver to someone like my brother who has different really severe exceptional needs can be incredibly isolating. I found that there's really very, very few people who actually can truly relate, or have similar experiences to me and my family. I mean, the only person who knows the whole picture is my mom. And it also kind of begets the question of how much do you share? How much do you, should you share? Like other people are dealing with their own lives and struggles too. And at times the amount of baggage I feel that I'm sometimes dealing with can feel a cargo aircraft. So like, what do you say? It's you don't want to dump on your friends or your family and stuff like that, but they can be considerable too. And so to circle back really to the question of how often I share personal stories, I don't really. Though I've been more comfortable lately, it takes a while to really kind of feel safe enough in a way to do so. I mean, and in another sense, this is coming from like trying to be sort of open and expressive as a guy can also be tough. Like as someone as a man or someone presenting as one, it can be, you can kind of get the tough or the cold shoulder sometimes, and it can be hard sometimes to find people who are actually receptive to sort of talking about like really considerable emotional topics. I mean, there was it was a point, I think it was early university, there just my dad had an injury, my brother was really struggling with being out of high school. I'm trying to juggle school on top of caring for them and stuff like that. And so everything kind of boiled up to the point where I reached out to a friend, and he kind of just gave me the cold shoulder. And it wasn't necessarily his fault. I can imagine that he didn't really necessarily know what to say in that situation, because again, there's a lot going on for me. But it's still hard. I mean, I've gone to counselors before during university, and because I really put my nose to the grindstone, because again, that self sort of pressure to succeed. They wondered what the issue was, because most people they see don't have stratospheric grades. One said that I should move out and just sort of leave my family, and that's kind of blind to the fact that I'm not an emotionless robot. My parents really were worried that I'd be a lawyer, so they really tried hard to make sure I had ethics and morals, and they did. They worked, but at the same time too, I don't feel like I could leave, because these are my family. These are my brother, my father, my mother, and I care for them. And so if I leave, for instance, and go live somewhere else, sure, I don't have those same struggles, but then I leave all of the stuff that I've been doing, all the kind of caregiving roles and responsibilities that I've taken to my mom. And that's a lot. I mean, there's a lot of tangible and intangible things that you do. So it's tough. I mean, and it really boils down to like, I care for my brother, my father, and my mother, and I want to make sure that their life is as good as it can be. It's that full quality of life aspect too. And so while there's times, for instance, where like I kind of fantasize about leaving, it's just that it's fantasies. I mean, it does though kind of circle back even to some of the thoughts, the stuff that Sandy Hodges talked about was the kind of the lack of self-care for kind of caregivers, because when you're so focused on looking at other people or kind of caring or supporting other people, it's hard to make time for yourself. I mean, one of the people talked about sort of the 9 to midnight shift, and I very much relate to that. And there's at one point I was talking to one of my close friends. This was just like 6 or 8 months back, and they actually know a fair bit. And they asked like, "What do you do for fun?" And that's a simple question, but I didn't really know how to answer that, and that kind of floored me. It's like, oh, I don't know. And so it can be really tough as a caregiver. You feel a lot of you maybe don't have the best self-care. That's kind of a continuing process, or there's a lot of kind of isolation, exhaustion, and burnout is real. And for me, part of this all kind of even circling back to like what do you tell other people is you get kind of tired, and so you get to a point where emotionally and mentally, for me, it's like, do you really want to put yourself out there again after you've kind of been burned before? Like you get to a point where like it's rather than emotionally investing yourself in going through everything again to someone else, to a friend, a counselor, clinician, or someone else, and you just say, "I'm good. No, everything's fine," because it's just, what else do you do? I mean, it's tough. If you don't have access to support, so you don't have access to resources, like you can kind of feel left on your lonesome. The I keep going back to your comments, Dr. Hodges, but like you kind of feel alone in a village, and so it's an ongoing process for me, kind of as I kind of grow older, kind of feeling comfortable with what I say or what I do with other people. But yeah, it's kind of evolving to really kind of take that long-winded discussion and kind of boil it down. So what about you now?
Thank you, Kyle. I want to first of all thank you, Lori, for saying that we have courage in sharing our stories, because it has taken a lot of courage to share my story, at least right now, and I'm sure it is for Kyle too. I don't want to speak for Kyle, but it has taken a lot of courage. I didn't share my story a lot with people other than family growing up. When I was in like elementary school and high school, I felt like autism was something to be ashamed of or embarrassed about, and I know that's probably not what like everyone on here wants to hear right now, but it's true. It is my story, and I do want to say, just as a tangent here, my story, I do want to like emphasize, like I know my experiences are very unique, and it is a spectrum disorder. So like, please don't say like think what I'm saying is like gonna be like advice or anything. I do just want to make that clear here. It's just my experience that I'm sharing right now. But yeah, it was very isolating in a way, because I felt like there was something wrong with me, and I couldn't share this with friends. It was very, so I felt like in a way like I had to like keep this like card really close to my chest, but it was like a card of like how, like who I am. Like I was going to like this behavior therapist, and like she was great and everything, but like it was like there were times where I was just like, why am I having to do this? Like I didn't understand as a kid. I understand now, but so it was a lot. And then in university, like through undergrad, I didn't really share too much either, and I went more from not really being embarrassed or ashamed, but instead it was like more this like role conflict where it was like, okay, like you're a male, you're masculine, you're not supposed to show, like, which Kyle kind of mentioned, like you're not supposed to show these kinds of emotions. But I'm like, I'm an emotionally complex person. Um, like I suffer, and I do attribute this to like having autism, anxiety, depression. And it was like, well, how do I talk about this? And how do I talk about my struggles, my internal struggles that I have with people that don't even know I have autism? And it was very, very recently during the self-reflection period that I decided that I'm like, okay, I'm going to be open about this. Like, this is something that actually has affected my life, and it's something that I want to shape my career. And one of the first times I openly said to like someone that I didn't know that I have autism was actually my first email to Dr. Zwaigenbaum, actually. And that was one of the first times I was like, no, I am like autistic, and this is what I want to work towards. And ever since then, I've been a lot more open, which again has only been a few months, but like with my colleagues here, like I've been open about my experiences and my struggles, and it has been this wonderful feeling. Like it's almost like I don't have to hide this like part of me, that like this big part of me. And sorry, I'm like, this is a lot here. I don't have to hide this part of me here, but it's like, it was tough for a bit. And I know how tough it can be for people on the spectrum because I have friends that also I found out recently were on the spectrum and we just never talked about it. And it was difficult to go through high school, like having to mask that or camouflage that or hide like a big part of us and like um trying to be normal. And I think that's the big thing too, is like trying to be normal. Like what is normal? You know? What is normal? You know, if you can't, and so I think that's one thing I learned is like when I was able to like realize that my quirks were like what kind of made me me, and like like even like neurotypical people or presumably neurotypical typical people like identify as like anxious or depressed, and those are like emotions that everyone has, like even if they're not clinical. Like I think that's when I was really like, you know what, like this is something that I need to be open about. So to answer your question, Lori, it was a very, very recent thing, but it was like it's always been a part of me. I've never tried to like try to like I guess deny it or repress it. I just hid it like, and yeah, until recently.
Well, thank you both for sharing that and for sharing the details of your experiences because it does take a lot of courage and you're sharing a lot of really important, emotional things. And I liked Kim's comment about how normal is a setting on your dryer. So, taking your experiences into account, and Nick, I'll start with you first. What would have been helpful to you and your family to know as you were getting ready to transition? Is there something you think that would have been helpful for you?
A crystal ball, honestly, no. But in all seriousness, I actually posed this question to my mom, and that was her joke. But I think it was like just knowing that other people struggle because like I was diagnosed back like 2003 2004 and the resources just they weren't talked about as much as they are now, and just knowing that other like now the stats are I think it's like 1 in 52 Canadians are on the autism spectrum or something like that. I can't remember off the top of my head the exact number, but just knowing that these other like there's other people that have struggles that are similar but different, because it is a spectrum disorder and there are experiences like there's some of the same, some like not all, not the same, I should say, but like there's experiences like on just the social isolation and like social challenges and stuff like that, and like motor skills and like just knowing you're not alone, I think would have been helpful to know. And it also would have been helpful to know like it would have been helpful if pediatricians didn't tell my parents, that I would have peaked at like age 9 or 10 or whatever, and like in a way like that's almost a worry now. I'm like, here I am in grad school, I'm still like in the back of my mind I'm like, what if I can't comprehend things in a scientific paper and I can't get through a graduate degree, like that's the worry I have, and that's because of like what was planted in my parents' head as a child. And like they didn't like obviously tell me that when I was like 6 years old or whatever, but like it was a discussion we had openly like as I kind of transitioned to adulthood, like the struggle, like my parents have been really good about like kind of not hiding anything from me, and I'm very grateful for that. Um, but I just think like, yeah, just more support from like the government, from like the education system, from doctors, from just and again, like I know that it was like 15 years ago, 15, 20 years ago now, but I think that would have been helpful. And then specifically, it's like say from the transition to university or like into adulthood, I think just that because like there were worries when I was 18, like when am I going to move home? When am I going to be able to like leave my small town of Kamloops and like live my own life? Because like I had these big dreams to like go to a big school and do something like at a big school, but it was like hard. It was like, am I going to be able to take care of myself? And when I was 18, like that was like a big question. It was very hard to kind of transition to that point where I was okay. And then like again, like in that transition to graduate school, like it was hard because I felt like a failure and I didn't know how much of it like it was hard. Like I really, really felt like I did something wrong, even though like it was a bullying situation. It was like, did I fail living on my own? Did I fail at my dreams of like, going into a more like academic route? And it was like, I think just, yeah, I mean, when I say a crystal ball, like I said that in a joking way, but like I do mean it, like in the sense that I do kind of wish that I knew that, like, like things would have worked out and that the support was there. You just had to like know where to look. And yeah, that's kind of what I have to say on that. I mean, yeah. Kyle, I'll give it to you now.
I mean, I echo a lot of what you say, Nick. I mean, for us, supports for Colin earlier on would have been our crystal ball. I mean, if you don't know what questions to ask or even to think about asking, even if there are resources or supports that are available, it's not on your radar. So you want to have access to them. I mean, supports for not just Colin too, but my family as well. I mean, they Colin was the oldest. I mean, he's my older brother, and so he was there first, and so there was a lot of kind of self doubt and worry when they were raising him, because it's like, oh, is this normal? I mean, I'm sure I'm not a parent, but I can probably suspect a lot of parents feel the same way with their firstborn. Is this normal? Is everything going all right? Like there's a lot of worry and anxiety that can kind of percolate in there. At least it did for my parents when they were raising Colin. And so, when for instance he had a severe stutter, like we had to pay out of pocket for that. There was no diagnosis. There was no provincial or government funding. We paid out of pocket for speech language pathology, and that helped. I mean, he doesn't have a stutter anymore, but that's tough, and not everyone has access to that. And the lack of diagnoses are scary, as we've talked about, but they can also be really kind of powerful in terms of helping empower you to kind of get understand people better, or get access to supports or care. And never mind, sort of, there's a social aspect too, to talk about the kind of, as a caregiver, you can feel isolated if no other families have similar kids who are neurodivergent or with exceptional needs. Having like bringing people over, bringing friends over, and you kind of feel self-conscious or kind of worry. And again, back to Dr. Hodges, like that whole comment about from one of the family members, where they kind of felt a little bit more socially outcast because other people just didn't understand. And so trying to find kind of communities, or have an awareness of communities, so you don't just feel so alone, because it kind of felt like to us, and it still does to some extent, like it's the out of Greek mythology, you're Sisyphus pushing that boulder uphill forever, where there's always another thing, there's always another thing that pops up, and through some of the sort of parent support groups or supports that we have now, it's that's helped. I mean, you can get a lot of info in terms of what to do, or what things to try, or people to see, or programs to try, and that's kind of worked for us. And so if we had that a little earlier, that would have been great.
So we just have one final question, and I would like to leave some room for discussion. So I'm going to ask Nick and Kyle for a little bit of brevity for this last question. But having had these experiences, Kyle, what in your opinion needs improvement?
Well, we're getting there, better healthcare and public education. I mean, we have had the public school system and healthcare system has been a bittersweet experience for us, especially with Colin. I mean, on one hand, we've met wonderful people who I'm quite convinced could probably walk on water. They have been saints, and they've been amazing, especially to help navigate sort of difficult times. But we've also had people and teachers and clinicians who've made it just that little bit harder. And there can be a real disproportionate impact of teachers and clinicians on people. I mean, in high school, Colin really enjoyed art, and then he had a lot of fun. He was being really creative. It was a great outlet. And then there was a confrontation with a teacher who did not recognize or understand that Colin was dysregulated, and he needed some time to cool down, and kind of kept grilling him, putting him on the spot in front of 30 other people. And Colin is a teddy bear, and he kind of just crumbled and melted down. And that was like such a powerfully negative experience that he hasn't touched it since. Like that still is kind of indelibly associated with that experience, that negative experience for him. And so kind of better education for general practitioners or doctors, or even just teachers, being like, okay, there are people who are neurodivergent, there are strategies or things that we can use to combat, or not combat it, but like to kind of help address them and their families, because it's tough. And sort of helping navigate that system a little bit better, where it's not so much as sort of was mentioned earlier, about the kind of kicking systems to make sure that they actually work. where so, systems could actually work for you, that would really have been ideal.
Okay, thank you, Kyle. And Nick, from your experience, what do you think needs improvement?
So I have to echo what Kyle said completely. The education system, just in general, is, at least like when I was like in childhood and everything, it was not where I think it should be. And like I'm still like learning about like the education system now, but like I just remember like in the education system, like I remember having a grade 2 teacher, and this was like when I was newly diagnosed. I had an awesome kindergarten teacher, awesome grade 1 teacher. Then in grade 2, like I just had a teacher who was like, oh no, he's fine, everything's fine. Like and it wasn't fine because I had these social challenges. I had these and I also had challenges, like I get bored in class. I needed to do more, like I needed to like be busy all the time. And I just like, not every teacher is accommodating. And like, yes, I've had some amazing teachers, but and then with the medical system, like I've already brought this up, of course, and I don't want to like dwell on it too much, but like just having pediatricians and like healthcare professionals tell my parents that, like, or like predict like when I'd peak, and like being so young, like it was, I mean, I couldn't imagine being a parent. Like I'm not a parent, but like I couldn't imagine being a parent and hearing that about your kid. Like, so I'd say, I mean, I know that's a very harsh statement to make, but it's like the education system, I think, needs to be changed. And I also think there just needs to be better resources for goal setting as well. I think goal setting is very important. Like whether you want to like go to university, graduate high school, or even take like public transit on your own. Like there's needs to be better resources to like, I guess, like guide people through those steps to like reach goals, because goal setting, in my opinion, is so important. And honestly, like, goal setting is what saved me, and like it's the reason I'm here now.
Okay, well, I want to thank Nick and Kyle for sharing their experiences. I really appreciated hearing about what it was like growing up as a younger sibling and as an adult on this, or now an adult on the spectrum.